What's up, everyone? This is the Landing Pad Podcast, Arkansas edition with Steve Rice. Thanks for joining me on the show today. As you may know, the show has been on production hold since the beginning of March. It's now the end of April as we record today's episode. We're all still sequestered and we're ramping up production virtually until we're able to record these episodes again in person. My guest today and I met several years ago when we were members of Leadership Greater Little Rock's Class 32. Maria is active here in Central Arkansas as a business owner and a community advocate. I know you'll love her Arkansas story, so let's get right to it here on the Landing Pad.
Welcome to the Landing Pad Podcast, Arkansas edition, where we explore what it means to be an Arkansan through the eyes of non-native Arkansans who have landed in and come to love the natural state. All right, Razorbacks and expats, it's time to grab your cheese dip, sweet tea, sit back, and enjoy the show. Now, here's your host, Steve Rice.
Marie Stacks, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
All right, so you moved to Arkansas in 2003. Tell me a little bit about where you moved from and what brought you to the natural state.
Yeah, so I actually have lived all over. I was a military brat growing up, and so, or military child, and left Georgia in 2003 and came here from there. My dad had retired out of the military, and so my mom actually is a professor, and so she got a job here at UA Little Rock. And at the time it was called Euler, but now, so she's actually at UA Fayetteville now, but that is what brought us here. So I actually landed here in 2003 and finished high school here.
So what does your mom teach, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, so she's in the College of Business. So she teaches information systems.
Gotcha. And so your dad had retired military and then you came for your mom's job. You guys were living in Georgia. What part of Georgia were you? Where were you? We
were in Columbus, which is just outside of Fort Benning. Okay. So kind of in southern Georgia. Yeah.
Gotcha.
I used to have a really good southern accent.
Right. So when you moved to Arkansas, had you been to Arkansas before or did you know anything about the state? What was kind of your experience with Arkansas?
To be completely honest, I had to look it up. All I knew was that most people were barefoot and that was it. So, which is terrible.
Right.
Obviously not the case, but back then I literally had to ask my parents, like, where are we going? Like, how far is this? Just because that was not a place we had just traveled as tourists. So it was new for sure.
And so how was that adjustment? You mentioned finishing high school and I imagine moving to a new place, going to new school, new friends, all of that, especially in those high school years could be kind of maybe traumatic, but how was that for you? How was that adjustment?
It wasn't terrible. So one of the, I guess, oddities, there were a few little things that were odd that I learned the hard way on. So kind of as an example, I learned that Arkansas is a one college, one team state.
Yes.
And so where I grew up, we had Auburn and we had Georgia and Florida and Tennessee, and it was it ran the gamut. And so I showed up at school one day in my Auburn shirt and my sweatshirt, and I immediately took it off within like the first hour because I was getting just dogged constantly. I'm like, who are you talking about? And they'd be like, yeah, it's terrible. What are you doing? This is the hog country. I'm like, okay. But no, it was good though. People were very welcoming. It was a challenge being in high school because the cliques had already been made.
Sure.
But at the same time, I was soon to be graduating. And so, within 4 years, I had my group and I was transitioning as well, just like they were. So it worked out okay.
You finished high school. Did you do your post high school education here in Arkansas or did you go somewhere else or?
Yeah, so I actually got a full ride scholarship as a Donaghy Scholar at UA Little Rock.
Okay.
And so I got my first degree from there, and it's a degree in Spanish. I don't use it very often, but it was a lot of fun to get. And then I got a master's degree from the University of Arkansas Medical Sciences, so UAMS.
And what was your study there? Did you do like healthcare administration or was it some clinical?
Yeah, so I did healthcare administration and definitely a whole different beast, but a lot of fun to learn about that side of healthcare. I thought that I wanted to be a heart surgeon growing up and then realized that I don't care for needles. So I figured that was kind of out.
Yeah. Yeah, you kind of got to do that if you're a surgeon. So.
Yep.
So hard pivot to administration, and that's different from what you're actually doing now. So tell me a little bit about your business and what you're doing and what your business does, and maybe some of the projects you're working on or organizations you're working with now.
Yeah. So Boost Midwest is the company that I own, and we help rapidly scaling companies continue to grow. And the goal is that sometimes it takes different forms, right? And so sometimes we come in and we do operations, just a general SWOT analysis and a little bit of consulting. In other cases, we do project management and we help with grant management and that piece. And then in some cases with some of my clients, we actually do basically serving as interim directors. And so the industries that we touch it's a pretty wide range. So kind of as an example, we've helped companies like Aptus Financial, so in the financial sector. And then we've helped companies like the Baker House, which is hospitality in North Little Rock. And then one of our big clients right now is the nonprofit, the Arkansas Center for Data Sciences. And I serve as their Director of Operations and PMO. And so it runs the whole gamut, but the entire goal is to make sure that what they're doing is sustainable. So we want to make their operations sustainable, their goals attainable, and really we're optimizing what they're doing.
So you've started working with them in the last couple of years or so. Were you with ACDS from the beginning? Because that's a fairly new initiative in Arkansas.
Yeah. So that's actually one of the things that I have found over the years is that I'm really good at helping companies get off the ground. Gotcha. And so Bill Yoder, the executive director there, called and said, "Hey, I've got a project for you." I didn't realize he meant an entire organization. So we took it on, and they started in 2018, and I was there about a month after they got started. So
excellent. And it's just continued to kind of blow up and really in a wonderful way. Can you talk a little bit about the mission of the organization? Just because I think some people who listen to the podcast, of course we have Arkansans here, but then there's also expats who are listening that may not know what's kind of happening on the ground here. What's happening with the Data Sciences Center? What is it? Why does it exist?
Yeah, so ACDS it's a nonprofit, and it's a public-private partnership. And it was founded out of the Blue Ribbon Commission the governor put through in 2017, I believe it was. And the entire goal is really to increase the tech talent in Arkansas and to close the gap for tech talent. In Arkansas right now, there's over 10,000 open IT jobs. So those are just job postings that are available for application. What we found is that there's not enough talent. And so there are various ways that we can fill that gap, and ACDS touches on all of it. So we have the long-term planning goals of K through 12 and all the initiatives that the governor's done to put computer science in the schools. So we're helping with that. We're helping make sure that they're aware what an IT occupation looks like. A lot of times people don't get into IT because they don't know what it means. It just seems very foreign, maybe not, it's too technical, right? So we break that down so that the K through 12 group can see what that really looks like. And then we get into higher ed and we say, okay, we're working with higher ed right now in a variety of capacities, one of which is to create synergy between all of the community colleges and the higher ed institutions in the state. Because we're such a small state, we actually have the ability to be extremely agile and move quick. And so we're working on creating something that will launch next fall. And I probably can't share too much about it, but it will be huge. Yeah, exactly. It'll be huge for higher ed, and it'll be the first in the nation to do it. So super exciting work there. But what we found to be the quickest to close the gap is actually apprenticeships. So you think of an internship and you think of somebody that's coming in to test a career, right? So it really benefits the candidate. An apprenticeship is actually a job on day one. And they come in and we provide a training partner that comes in and does the training. So if you wanted to come in and learn how to be a software developer and you wanted to learn Java, we would get a training partner. The company would hire you day one. You'd be trained, and then you would get on the job training. They can customize and tailor that to exactly what they need you to know. And so it takes away having to have a 4-year degree. It closes that gap a lot faster because literally I can pull you off the street. Some of our candidates have been Uber drivers, or they've worked at Walmart as, just sales associates and things like that. And so literally taking them and bringing them into a job that they have a passion for. And as long as they have what I call the GSD factor, then they're a great fit. So it covers all of that. And then there's a lot of grants that we work with that help as well in the IT sector. So ACDS, really the mission is to empower, people's lives in Arkansas through data science and through their careers.
It's such an amazing initiative and an important initiative to, like you said, really close that gap in a practical way. I've really looked at that when I moved into education, I noticed that gap between what we do and, of course, higher ed. I'm always looking, how can I bridge the gap between, the students I have in higher ed, and then on the other end, higher ed to the workforce. As you have gotten into this community and built your business, how did you get started as a business owner?
So basically, my resume looked like crap. I ended up, so that sounds really weird, but I ended up being hired away from company to company. And I am very lucky in my career that I've never had to look for a job. I'm very unlucky in my career because my resume, when you look at it, I have 1 to 2 year stints at every company I've ever worked for, because I was going in, I was being hired and called by CEOs and directors and that kind of thing. And they'd say, hey, we've got a problem. And so said, you're really good at fixing that. And so I would be hired from one company to the next. And the only reason I would leave would be because I'd fixed the other problem and I was kind of bored. And so I reached out to a mentor, and her recommendation was, look, you're good at what you do. Go do it for a living. So now Boost Midwest is the company I work for, and I just help the companies as I get them as clients rather than having them on my resume.
Sure.
So
one of the things that you had said is that you believe philosophically that a person can only be as good as the community that they create. And I thought that was a really interesting way of phrasing the drive to impact the community, which clearly you're doing and you have done. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that philosophy, where it comes from, and how you've actually seen that play out in your life and career here in Central Arkansas.
So being as great as a community create was really something that I think I found just out of the fact that I naturally like to volunteer for things, and I'm a fixer. And so I would go in and I'd say, okay, I see a need in this area. What's the solution? And one of my other phrases I use is, you can complain about it once and it's a problem. You complain about it twice and it's your problem. And so then if it's your problem, you have to go fix it. So that's what I kept finding. And, unfortunately, there are things in Little Rock that its history has been bumpy. And so I noticed that in Little Rock, there's a lot of opportunity for improvement. There's a lot of things that we should capitalize on that we aren't. And so I took it upon myself in 2011 to actually found a nonprofit that was specific to young professionals. And it was about making the community better. And so Rotaract Club of Little Rock came out of somewhat that vision. And it was just married to Rotary International's mission, and it coincided perfectly. So for me, it's always been about, everything you do in life has a purpose. Whether you realize it or not, the time you spend on something is either of value or it's not. But it's making an impact, positive or negative, in either way. So I intentionally want that anything that I do leaves a positive impact on the rest of that around me. So, and I was always taught growing up that you leave something better than you find it.
One other thing you said that I wanted you to talk a little more about was that you've used community improvement, and now, as you've explained, your natural proclivity to volunteer and to get involved and to solve problems as a method or a path for self-development. So how has that kind of parallel path happened along the way, either personally or professionally, aligned with the work you're doing and the impact you are making and want to make in the state?
I'm very lucky in that I get to pick the clients I work with.
Mm.
And so that's part of why when I got the chance to work with ACDS, I took it because I saw the bigger impact. If a client comes to me with a project, I want to know more than just what the project is. I want to know what the overarching goals are. And if it has, any kind of outreach to the community, it pulls at my heartstrings a little bit.
Sure, sure.
But I think it also, I see what other companies are doing or not doing in the cities that they are in or in the state that they're in. And so it allows me the opportunity to really be very cognizant of what I'm doing with my company. So our team, when we get a project brought to us, then, my team knows to look at it very closely. And we're lucky. We're lucky that we get to do that.
When you have these opportunities, is it a strategic or intentional thing, or a conscious effort where you look at it? Now, I'm kind of asking maybe personally, where you look at it and say, "Oh, I see an opportunity for myself to grow or to expand my experience, my network, my skills, whatever it is." How do you approach that? Does that play
It
much
does.
into it?
Yeah, it does play into my decision factors. I don't want to make something that's going to cause me to be stuck in a box. I don't
Right.
want to choose a project that's like that. I don't want to choose a client that's like that. I think at the same time, if I take away, and I'm one of those people that I look at every day. I literally at the end of every day look and say, well, did I handle every situation appropriately?
Mm.
Or, there are times that because I don't necessarily, being an entrepreneur, one of the one things you don't have is you don't have a colleague necessarily sitting next to you all day to say, hey, in that meeting you were in, you could have said it a little bit. So I've actually been known to self-record and say, okay, let me do that pitch one more time, or let me rehash that conversation I had. And so I'll give that recording to, a mentor or colleague that I do have. And I'll say, can you coach me here? So I actively seek out that kind of self-improvement, but I also know that there are times I'm going to make a mistake, and I acknowledge that factor. And humility goes a long way.
Mm-hmm.
And being honest with people to say, look, I didn't handle that well. Let me back up and rephrase what I was trying to say. So you can handle it in the moment, or you can handle it after the moment. And in some cases it stings a little bit, but I think being an entrepreneur, you have to be able to accept that. I mean, failure is part of what you do as an entrepreneur. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the fastest path to learning, right?
Amen. It's funny because I would always come home growing up and I'd get like 100% on a test, but because I got the bonus question,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd miss one on the test, and I would always get the question of, well, why did you miss that one? Learn from it, So, looking back, I'm like, okay, I need to remember that for my kids. I know it'd be a little bit softer on it, but at the same time, it does have value. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about kind of where you've been, where you are now. As you look out at the opportunity landscape in Arkansas, specifically here in Central Arkansas, what are you most excited about, or what do you see as the most exciting next step that Little Rock is kind of poised to take?
That's a great question. I think it depends on where you sit in our
Mm.
community on what you see being the next big step, right?
Yeah.
For me, as a small business owner, we're in the capital city, and there is an immense amount of resources because we have the governor's office here, because we have a lot of state offices here. And so I think that if we can grab hold of the growth that small businesses, and we're doing a little bit of that with the Venture Center and some of the other, organizations, Women's Foundation and that kind of thing. I think there's a big opportunity there. I also think that the mayor's done a really good job of taking a hold of where he can take ownership. There are some things that he can't control, but where he can, he's brought in new businesses like Amazon and Costco, and he's done his work there, and made some hard choices. So I think that's been beneficial to us, and I hope to see that continue to be beneficial. But yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity in just the mindset shift.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing the capital city as being a stronghold for the state, and taking advantage of that. And in a weird way, COVID-19 has been kind of it's set back a lot of progress in many states. But again, going back to the fact that we are small and we're agile, and believe it or not, I think there's a big opportunity for us to leapfrog a lot of states with what we can do in the time that we'll have to recuperate and how much closer back to normal we are already.
Yeah. I absolutely think that's a huge opportunity for Arkansas, just because we default to taking care of each other. We default to jumping in, getting our hands dirty, and just working hard. Typically, I mean, that's just a very Arkansan frame of mind, is just put your head down and work hard. And I see that just in my own community. I live downtown, and as soon as this thing kind of hit with force and everything started closing down, within hours, somebody had organized a spreadsheet to take Venmo donations for, restaurant employees that were displaced, or, different things. And then it became more formalized. I think someone put up a website where you could leave virtual tips, and somebody else created a Google form that people downtown, if you needed somebody to go get your groceries, or you couldn't, if you were high risk or elderly, then those of us that could volunteer. And just seeing those little things, like, we're small enough that those things work, and it makes a measurable impact when it's time to get back on our feet. So
absolutely. I mean, we can't beat the pot and pan and hear each other from the other side of town like they can in New York, but I can help my neighbor, and we do.
Yeah, absolutely. No, there's definitely so many benefits of being here, and so much opportunity here. It's been just a pleasure speaking with you and kind of learning about your story. Even though we've been friends, it's been wonderful to get to know more of your story, how you landed here and what you've done here. And I'm even more grateful that you are here, and grateful for the impact you are having on our state and our city. It inspires me, and I admire you so much. I'm grateful for you being on the show today.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me.
If you enjoy the show, be sure to like, subscribe, and follow. And I'd certainly appreciate a rate or review to help others find the show. Please join me next week for another Arkansas story here on the Landing Pad Podcast.